Welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick. In this video, I am going to be discussing adaptation and how individuals and governments are going to react to AI. And the main risk let's first talk about is with governments and countries, because society is stuck between a rock and a hard place with AI. On one hand, if you embrace AI to the max and try to just run with this technology as quick as possible and make your businesses and society that much more efficient, a lot of the problems that people have been complaining about since Mark Andreessen's "software eats the world" speech will continue to magnify. In fact, I would actually recommend watching a video about this dilemma that I'm going to link here. That was a pretty good panel that discussed about the ethics of making money, along with just the potential disruption of the value of the individual human in a world where technology can exceed the output from an economic perspective of most laborers. So the AI thing, I think, just magnifies what robotics and offshoring did to blue-collar labor and puts the pressure now on white-collar labor, particularly the highly educated precariat classes. And if you embrace this to the max, you're going to make these people completely unemployable because their academic credentials didn't train them with any skills apart from what the AI is very good at doing, which is aggregating data and communication and regurgitating in a way that is more palatable. That's what a lot of lower level white collar jobs essentially are, or organizing disparate data or disparate signals to create a more accurate, complete picture. That is also something that AI and language learning models can do very well. And so, yeah, you could see a major risk in terms of increased unemployment. And it'll probably be increased at a pace faster than the level of retirements. And what are you going to do if you have not just a higher unemployment rate on the base, but also the unemployment rate of the people who are most likely to be agitators, which are the young and highly educated? Historically, basically since the French Revolution, most revolutions have been sparked by people who believe they have a certain level of status due to their education or intelligence, but have no means to apply that or have no means to make a upper class or upper middle class living from that profession. So basically just the overemployed master's graduate. That archetype has been the root for a lot of political revolutions in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, and even the early 21st century. And so that is very destabilizing. So that's the risk of letting this run full on, is that you would have losses of jobs, and particularly losses of jobs to the people who are most likely to cause trouble and challenge your authority if you are leadership. Then there's also a demographic component. Like if people think that there's going to be no jobs in the future, probably a lot of younger couples are going to be like, why have children if they're going to have no way of supporting themselves, or AI is going to make it harder for me to support myself and a family. And so it could lead to an acceleration of the current demographic decline that we've seen across the developed world. So that's one risk. The other risk is impeding progress of AI. There's a lot of incentive to impede progress of AI or make it less accessible to businesses or the masses. The first one is to prevent the mass unemployment concern that I just mentioned. Even to protect jobs that otherwise wouldn't exist through that. The other thing you'd want to impede AI is that people could use this AI to do deeper research and create better answers for policy solutions than what goes on in the legislatures, and could make them at risk of looking like they don't know what they're doing. Also, a lot of politicians, careers prior to getting into politics, were in professions such as the legal profession that have a high risk of being replaced by AI. And so, in order to protect their law firm or their employment options before or after their terms in office, there's that kind of self-serving incentive to try to impede the progress of AI. Or there's just the lament that, oh, nothing is real and authentic anymore. It will destroy our culture if the machines are doing everything. Like, if the machines are creating all the art, where's the room for individual human expression? And so those are the incentives out there to slow down or impede. And there's also the government censorship incentive, which if governments don't want certain people to do deeper dives on certain information that could be destabilizing to the political regime of a given jurisdiction, I'm not going to go into any specifics because that information varies differently depending on the leadership of a specific country, then that also would motivate people to want to crack down and limit the spread of this technology. Like, even if you look at ChatGPT now, if you go into certain controversial topics, it won't say anything, or it will not give you an answer. And there's plenty of examples of this. A lot of it has to do with well-cited research that ChatGPT has implicit political bias. There's others topics that you can't really mention about it just because they can be considered offensive. And yeah, like, people looking that stuff up can create social tension and give people who are on the dissonant side of the aisle more power than they would otherwise, or to confirm their confirmation biases that people would not want. Again, I have my views on this stuff on a case-by-case basis, but I'm not going to really elaborate on that. But that is another incentive to curtail this. However, that's simply slowing down or stopping the widespread use of AI technology to save jobs or to preserve political power and social order has its costs. The main cost is lack of competitiveness. If one country fully maxes out and uses all the AI tools available and uses them in a way that is unthrottled and uncensored, they are going to have a competitive advantage against a country that bans this stuff outright or has severe limitations. An example of this is that Italy banned ChatGPT earlier this year and then repealed it just recently because of this very risk. Like, if Italy had kept that ban on AI, they would have fallen behind other developed countries. And I think even their own government quickly realized that and overturned it. So that's the risk, is that if you fall behind economically, your country's living standards do not rise or decline because of it, or you have emigration of your skilled, talented people to move to the countries that do embrace it, or businesses moving their manufacturing operations or their hirings or their economic production to the countries that embrace it, you lose that way too. So what does the government do? I mean, I think you'll see some governments, and I really honestly don't know which ones. It really depends on who's in power at the time and how secure they feel about their status in society, will try to curtail this technology, or they will work with the bigger technology companies to say, like, we can use it for this stuff, but you can't use it for that. But eventually there'll probably be an open source, uncensored version that gets out somehow and makes these safeguards a moot point. But yeah, and the countries that do try to throttle it will fall behind. and the countries that embrace this the fastest will have a much better performing economy on the aggregate, but at the same time, they'll risk major social catastrophe from the byproducts of this. Like the Industrial Revolution was a disruptor that led to several revolutions, 2 world wars, and major migration from rural areas to the cities. I think AI can have the same kind of potential to how it changes people's relationship with work, relationship with their families, relationships with their governments, and governments' relationships with each other. So that's, I think, whichever side has different risks, and it really depends on which. I think the countries that win are the ones that have enough social cohesion and have a strong enough of an economic base already that they could fully embrace AI and be able to make it through without a revolution. Some countries that probably stand out to me on that front that have a level of high social cohesion and a willingness to embrace technology and the right demographic profile that won't hurt them too badly would be a place like Japan. I think would benefit from the AI world. I think there are certain countries in Europe that would benefit well from the AI world. Depending on immigration policy, the United States could benefit pretty well from the AI because a lot of the leading innovators in this field are in the United States, but the United States has the risk of having an excess labor supply and the social disruptions of that due to relatively high rates of immigration and a demographic cliff that's not as steep as some other countries. I think Mexico benefits from this just because it increases the value of their direction towards physical manufacturing, which is going to be less affected by the disruptions in AI. And yeah, it's to be in countries also that have relatively low population densities and high GDP per capita benefit from this too, because they have enough resources to go around, even if employment opportunities and the white collar level are disrupted and of other things, the value added exports beyond just purely services. That is, again, this is an early assessment on this. These are just my guesses on who I think could win from embracing AI. I think countries that are slow to embrace AI are probably going to get in trouble, or ones who have a high amount of workers and not enough places to put them into new lines of employment or have enough resources to keep these people satisfied in other ways. But I think in the longer term, not to get too dark, is that there's probably the solution to AI as a social problem from the politician's perspective. I'm not saying this from my perspective necessarily. Is some sort of plugging in the lower classes into a real life version of the Matrix, or like a Ready Player One world that you just don't unplug out of. I mean, if you can use AI tools and a virtual world that feels real, we're not at the technology yet that people would not. It's kind of like when you're dreaming, but before you wake up, you feel like you're in a different world, but you really just are sitting in your bed. If you can recreate that sensation when people are not asleep, and it can kind of stay consistent and without latency errors in that other world, that might be the solution in the long term. Yeah, that's the way you would prevent a revolution, because you give people some alternative thing to focus on, and they don't even realize that they have really no place in the actual physical world. The technology isn't there yet, and this is probably the potential of the metaverse was trying to convey. But before AI, things aren't simply bad enough in the real world for most people, and the substitute of the virtual world is not good enough yet to make this a reality. But when those technological trends intersect, that's going to be a different story. And I think that is really how governments are ultimately going to have to solve the unemployment driven problem for AI. And I could possibly be very wrong, like some other technological revolutions have taught us that AI is not a net destroyer of jobs and it's a net creator of jobs. But we'll see. I just think the scope of this is much bigger than those. And the thing is that the challenging part is for governments is to adapt the time between when the AI technology gets good enough to replace a lot of college educated level jobs and the time between when the metaverse, for lack of a better term, or the matrix becomes good enough that it's a fair, if not more favorable substitute to participating in a real world where less people are needed to keep it functioning and less people, because of that, can afford to have a good life in it. Because all these labor-saving technologies have done essentially is that they have raised the minimum level of productivity that a person needs to be able to survive in a modern first world city. That's essentially what it does, and that's why you've seen the struggles with inflation, and you've seen a lot of struggles with cost of living consistently rising faster than real wages for most of the last 25 years or so. Is really just simply is that the average productivity of a worker is lower than the minimum productivity needed to thrive in a certain environment. And AI probably will just make the bargaining power of workers even lower. Even if the cost of living stays the same, on the net, it will make it harder for people to compete and produce enough to compete on their own will. That's why social welfare states, it's not and I was daily thinking about this, is just kind of my theory here. It's not a coincidence that social welfare states continue to expand and rise in popularity at the same time as industrial technologies continue to rise in popularity and use, because the base level needed to support oneself becomes increasingly higher. The only way to prevent population collapse or civil unrest to the degree that you can't have a functioning society is to have subsidies and other sorts of governmental support to keep people alive who could not compete in the post-industrial world. Like, that might be another political reaction to this, because the people who are most likely to get disrupted by this already tend to be the base of political movements that tend to support more redistribution and increased social welfare policies. And so I think you'll probably see more clamoring for that, and maybe attempts to tax AI, which would essentially be the same thing as trying to throttle it. So I don't need to go into the explanation of the implications of taxing AI, because it's effectively is trying to throttle its development, and it will probably be an ineffective one because there'll be workarounds to do so, or participation in countries that do not tax AI or tax it at a far lower rate. So unless you have like a global minimum tax for AI and automation, I don't think taxing AI would really do anything to address the issues. But there'll probably be increased demand for social welfare services for those who are not competing in the new post-AI world. And speaking of competing in the post-AI world, I'm going to go in the next video about how individuals who want to be able to adapt and win in this new AI world should go about doing it. Thanks for watching.